All right. So what's up, everybody? This is the second of our monthly creator interview segments that we're doing, and I'm really excited to be able to welcome to the channel a writer who he's got a really cool story, and I'm looking forward to him sharing that. And I've really been a fan of his Scouts Honor creator-owned title that he's done, his independent series. But we were welcoming David Pepose. I think I'm doing that right. Give me a thumbs up if I'm saying that correctly. Awesome. And we're welcoming him to the channel, and just excited to be able to sit down with him and talk. What's up, Amazing Spider Flint? Good to see you here. Yeah, you did beat Larry Green to the first comment of the stream. But hey, whether you're watching this here live with us or you're watching this on the rewind, make sure and hit like for the video. Make sure and drop a comment below. Let me know what you thought of it, and suggestions for other creators you might want to see appear here on the channel. This is Carlos Collects Comics, and we are all about the love of this hobby that we all share, and sharing knowledge with the new and intermediate collectors that are coming into the space. Real quick, just a reminder that we do have the Pop Culture Power Show coming up in the greater Houston area. And if you use the discount code Carlos Collects Comics, you will get 10% off your purchase. Plus, you'll get a special surprise that I am not going to reveal yet, but you will like it. That'll be stacked on top of your 10% discount. So I'm looking forward to seeing those of you who are in the area that can be there for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. But like I said, we are here for Creator Interview. This is our once a month segment where we will do a podcast style interview with different professional comic creators working in the industry. And we've got with us David, who is going to share about some of his projects that he's got. So thank you guys for being here real quick. And it's good to see y'all. Mr. Collector, what's up? You did make it second place. Glad that you could join us and be here for us. Let me go ahead and welcome David out. Enjoyed getting to spend a couple minutes with him backstage and just hanging out and talking a little bit. But David, welcome to the show.
Hi, happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, man. I was really excited when you responded right away. Sure. Because like I had shared, I've David's creator-owned comic Scouts Honor has been out, and it's out in trade paperback form as well. So you guys make sure and check it out because it's really cool. And I really want to get into talking about the world building for that, but sure. But I want to start with a couple of other things. First off, I guess you're let's see, how long have you been in like the comics and the comic industry?
Well, I guess as far as like long term, because I've worn a lot of hats over the years. I guess I've been at the industry. I think May marks 15 years.
Oh wow. Okay.
I've been at this for a while, just in various capacities.
Yeah, yeah.
I started as a DC Comics intern. I worked on books like Batman R.I.P. and Final
Oh,
Crisis, and
nice.
Jeff Johns' Green Lantern.
Okay.
Um, uh, I believe I had a little overlap on Dwayne McDuffie's Justice League, and some very, very early overlap on J.H. Williams's Detective Comics, well before that came out. I did that. That was the summer of 2008. For those who remember the summer of 2008,
Yeah.
there was also a horrible global recession that took place. So there were no jobs. And so I wound up going into journalism. I worked as a crime reporter and a state politics reporter. That was my day job. However, I kind of kept my toes in the comics industry. I moonlit at Newsarama. I worked there for over a decade. I started as a reviewer and a blogger, and then wound up kind of climbing the ladder to become the reviews editor over there for a long time. And I think I started working on my first comic. It's probably 2015. No, 2015. I think sounds about right, or maybe 2014 even. For Spencer and Locke, that was my first creator-owned book, and that eventually came out in 2017. And I've been lucky enough to continue making comics since then. So,
Very cool.
Yeah,
That's
like
that's
6 years as a creator, and or 5 years as a creator, but 15 overall.
wow. Okay. Do you find that there was any like because I know like journalism, you kind of there's like a strict process for that. Do you find like any of the things that you picked up working in journalism that carried over into comics?
Oh yeah, a ton. Not so much like the stuff that I covered, but I think just the
Yeah.
act of being a journalist.
Right.
Um, you learn very quickly not to be afraid of a deadline, and you learn very quickly not to be afraid of a word count. And those are two things that like those are survival skills in the comics
Yeah.
industry. Kind of figuring out like how do you tell a story if you have this amount of space, what's the story you absolutely have to tell,
Right.
and kind of figuring out how to structure things that way. I tend to write pretty modularly as a result of me being a journalist, because I would write a paragraph and realize like, okay, I got to shift this upward. And so I'd often, even when I write scripts now, I'll write a scene and I'll be like, this is coming too early or this is coming too late. And so I kind of lop off the beginning and lop off the end and kind of redo those and then shift the whole thing over. So that was really important. I think my time at Newsarama was also really helpful. It really was kind of a critical boot camp for me.
Mm-hmm.
So often, you read comics and it's very easy, I think, to be kind of passive with the way that you respond to them. You're just like, thumbs up, thumbs down. And I understand that as a reader, you have no other responsibility other than to read and decide whether or not you enjoy it. But as a critic, you have to show your work. You have to really articulate, like, what do I like about this? Why don't I like this particular thing? And so you kind of start to build your own toolbox. You see the things you like. For example, like I'm not a particularly huge fan of like decompressed storytelling. And you can see it in my work that like I really cram in a lot of story.
Right. Yeah.
Chapter. And that was something that kind of came from my time as a reviewer. So you also learn from other people's mistakes, and you see, oh, okay, that did not really work out so well. And so you remember that, and you're like, all right, I don't want to repeat that for whatever reason. And that kind of becomes part of your voice. It's all the theory that gets generated. Eventually, though, you kind of have to put rubber to road and do your own work. But having that background as a journalist and kind of knowing the lay of the land a little bit, it really kind of helped me out a lot in terms of just figuring out like how am I going to write and what's my voice going to be like as a writer.
Yeah, I mean those are really good words, because like, so Okay, so there's a couple of things that sparks that brings to mind that I want to kind of explore for a couple minutes. And everybody watching, thanks to those who are popping into the chat and saying, "Hey, Brooklyn Born, Mr. Collector," all the rest of you that have popped in and out, and those who are giving feedback on Instagram as well. Thank you guys for checking in and touching base. So David, like I think the first thing is like, so was there any kind of a hurdle for you in getting into, because you mentioned, you learn very quickly to not be scared of a word count or a deadline. Was
Yeah.
there any kind of mental hurdle you had to get over, like in terms of like the creative side of like generating comic pages?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it was just giving myself permission to
Right.
do it.
Okay.
I grew up in the Midwest. I really didn't have any like creative role models, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so for me, I kind of always felt like, oh, being a writer, that's somebody else's job. That like I didn't give myself permission to think of myself that way.
Yeah.
And it was, I felt like I needed a more stable job. And so, I worked as a journalist for a while. I worked in publicity and PR for CBS for many years. I worked as a Hollywood assistant, and the common through line through all of those jobs was like, I wasn't like super great at any of them. Like I feel like I had like a B plus, in
Yeah.
any of those jobs, and some
Yeah.
of those jobs, my Hollywood assistant job, I was terrible at. Like that was not a good fit whatsoever. And at the same time, and anybody who reads comics for a long time, I think probably can empathize with this. It kind of comes in waves. How much you love the comics industry at any given time.
Right.
It's sort of like rooting for the Mets. Sometimes you're responding to a whole lot of things. Sometimes you're really not responding to a whole lot. And as a reviewer, you really feel that very acutely. And so I was kind of hitting this wall where I was like, I'm not feeling particularly creatively fulfilled at my job, and I'm not really responding to a lot of the books that I'm reading and reviewing. I really kind of have to change my relationship with comics, or I need to walk away.
Right.
And so for me, that was sort of the thing that kind of gave me the permission to, well, maybe I'll try writing a script and see how that turns out. And even then I had couched it as, well, maybe I'll work in development for film and television, which is still like an office job that feels creative.
Right.
Because it's the sort of the equivalent of being a comics editor.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, I'll write a script, and I can show that I can break down story, and that'll get me this office job that I so desperately crave. And I realized after the fact that I was putting the cart before the horse. Like if I can write a good comic script, maybe that's the calling.
Yeah.
So that was really, I think, the big hurdle. I think everything else it's really just trial and error.
Right.
I think, especially with creator owned, the one thing that I think people don't really realize about creator owned that I think is so great, and I think is the reason why I do think all creators should be starting in creator owned, as opposed to like a time in yesteryear where a lot of creators were starting at Marvel and DC and then building that audience and taking it to creator owned. I think when you're working at Marvel and DC, you have to hit deadlines and you have to like problem solve things fast.
Yeah.
And as somebody like walking off the street, I would almost guarantee 95% of people walking off the streets do not have the experience and the skill set to pull that off. It's just, it was hard for me having, 5 creator owned books under my belt when there was a learning curve to my first Marvel book. I can't imagine somebody doing that with like no experience. So the great thing about creator owned is the deadlines are much looser. Like, of course, when the book comes out, it has to come out monthly.
Right.
But you can develop that book for as long as you want. It's really kind of like fine tune, any problems out of it. You can really kind of trial and error your way through the story and the script to figure out like what's the best way of telling the story. And so, I think really for me, it was just the creative hurdle was just giving myself permission to try.
That's really good. That's really good advice. And so I wanted to also ask about so your creative process, because you are a professional writer, a professional creator. Like, what is that? And I also know that, because I've studied creativity some, and then enacted some of it myself as well. I have great admiration for those who are professional writers, because you took that jump and you took that chance and you did that. Um, how did you structure your, like, I guess, your creative process to maximize those creative juices? Like on a daily basis, a work week. Like, what does your work week, quote unquote work week, look like?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, I think it has a lot in common with working out.
Yeah.
It's one of those things like, um, doing something is always better than doing nothing. And for
Right.
me, I try to, when I'm not in sort of development brainstorming mode, I'm trying to like hit a minimum page count, and it's not a huge minimum page count. I mean,
Yeah.
the way that I always kind of frame it is, um, most scripts are 20 to 22 pages.
Hmm.
So as long as I'm not in sort of outline development mode, if I'm in scripting mode, that means I got to do 4 pages a day,
Hmm.
which is really like not the end of the world. That's
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
very doable thing. But if you do 4 pages a day, 5 days a week, you have a script every week. So
Right.
that's getting something done is always better than doing nothing. And to be honest, as a creator, the thing, I think the most challenging thing still on my end is like shifting gears where, if I spend a couple weeks developing, a new project for Marvel or for creator owned, it kind of does take a little bit of, I kind of have to work out the kinks again and like reteach myself how to write. uh,
Right. Right.
when I'm getting out of that stage. So the development stage is always sort of like it's almost the trickiest, because it's really doing a lot of the hard work of like hammering out all the story beats and where it's all going to go.
Right.
Scripting is fun because you've already assembled the ingredients, and so now this is the cooking stage, and you're putting everything together,
Right.
and you're
Right.
figuring out like, all right, like how much of this ingredient do I need, or is there a way that I can you know flip this on its head that like it seems really cool and exciting. Um, so yeah, I think beyond that, it's just reading a lot.
Mm.
I read a lot every week. I spend a good chunk of time on Wednesday, like reading through all the weekly releases.
Mm.
Um, and some of that is just based on the nature of my work now. Like it is good for me to know what is going on at Marvel, uh,
Right. Right. Right.
working at Marvel. So I know, okay, like I know which villains have been used recently. I know what the
Right.
character status quos are looking like. I know who's off the board, and reading everything every week, that's very helpful to me. And I read everything that's going on at DC because I kind of want to know. I want to keep up with what's going on over there, but also just like, is there anything that they're doing that like would be interesting? Is there a Marvel spin that can be
Hmm.
put on
Yeah.
that? So yeah, I think that is really helpful. Especially just nothing really beats reading a good comic.
Yeah.
Like that
Yeah.
that really feels like a brain food. Um, I think brain food is a good way to describe it. I do that for film and television as well. Like I'm constantly kind of trying to find something that like inspires me to bring my A game.
Mm.
So like things like Altered Carbon, Mr. Robot. I'm watching The Americans right now. I actually had
Mm.
never watched it. I think it's terrific. Um, Stuff like that really kind of helps inspire me. Um, I think the other thing, which may be a little counterintuitive, is I always try to take one night off a week.
Yeah.
Just totally unplug. I'm not working on anything. It's cheat night. I order whatever
Mm.
food I feel like. I watch whatever movie I feel like. Sometimes the movie can help inspire whatever it is I'm working on, but just kind of giving myself that evening to just let the muscles rest winds up being very helpful, and it really does save me from burnout in an industry where burnout can creep on you really easily.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it feels like that, like burnout could be, because that was one of the questions I was going to have asked you also was,
Yeah,
what do you do to recharge and to
yeah,
refresh? It sounds like,
yeah. Friday
uh,
night cheat night.
yeah.
I unplug from Twitter. I know my editors are out for the weekend, and I just kind of just I order whatever food is not on my diet, and watch whatever movies I feel like watching, and it's a good way to kind of just recenter. and also just spend time with friends and family, because that's really like it's a good reminder of like why you're doing all this, and I think this industry in particular, and I say this as someone who's a fan of all this stuff, but it's very easy to get lost in it.
Yeah.
And so making sure that you ground yourself, at least once a week, and sort of reset. I think that's really helpful in terms of, me not like becoming a nervous wreck and putting myself in a position where I can't deliver the work that I want to deliver.
Yeah. So gosh, there's so much good stuff there. Thank you for sharing all that. Because and I think some of that's just good, like applicable life advice for anything, taking that time off. You say taking a night off, do you are you more of like a nighttime creative or a daytime creative, or have you had to change that? Or
I mean, historically I'm more of an afternoon evening creative. I usually in the morning, I'm checking email. I'm usually interfacing with artists. I go to the gym. I feel like usually, it's sort of like post lunch. That's when I'm kind of like, all right, I've gotten everything that needs to get done. I'm recharged kind of physically and mentally. I can finally kind of put rubber to the road. And get working on it. And so that's usually, I hunker down in my office, and I'm just like, all right, I got to get my minimum of 4 pages done. And the great thing about saying, a minimum of 4 pages is like, sometimes the 4 pages come really quick. I don't write in order. I write whichever pages are easiest at any particular moment, or whichever pages are coming to me at any particular moment. And so, sometimes I blast through 4 pages real fast, and I'm like, all right, I think I could do another 2, 3, 4 pages. And that's great, because then it's sort of like, all right, like I'm still getting my script done for the week, but hey, if I get it done in 3 days, great. Like, then like I get to kind of be a little more chill on Thursday and Friday. So yeah, I think it's I think the schedule works. The only thing that about comics is like sometimes you can't really count on a particular schedule. I mean, that's sort of the best part, and sometimes the worst part is this is a business that can surprise you. Particularly for me at Marvel, a lot of the work that I've done, it's sort of been I've been called when something breaks down in the schedule.
Okay.
Where hey, like for example, my very first Marvel credit that came out, I had been tapped to write Savage Avengers for quite a while. I think they called me, it was July of 2021 over it. It was like right before the July 4th holiday. And but like, for example, my first published credit was for Elektra, Black, White, and Blood.
Okay.
And I got called because somebody had to drop out. And they were kind of like, hey, we've heard that you're fairly fast for scripting. Would you be able to like kind of turn around a story pretty fast? And I wound up turning in the script in 48 hours, which is a little faster than most assignments. But it's sort of that thing. Like I'm working on something right now that one of my editors at Marvel, it was something that was kind of out of my wheelhouse, and I'm still figuring out if I really have an angle that's viable for them. But they hit me up last week and were like, hey, would you have any particular ideas for this? And I was I at the moment had been like, oh, I'm actually like ahead on my scripts. I was feeling kind of good. I was like, I don't know anything for like a month or two. And now I'm I've spent the last week sort of beating my head against a wall trying to figure out like, how do I make this particular thing?
Gotcha.
Is there a way that I can kind of make this thing work?
Yeah.
That's cool. It's one of those things that like when it works out really great. There are times where it's more stressful than others, but that's kind of the thrill of the job, is can you rise to the challenge?
Right.
I've felt really fortunate that so far that seems to have worked out for me, and I think that's what kind of keeps me coming back into the ring, even if they throw me a project that's feels like a real curveball, I'm sort of like at this point, I want to see if I can pull it off.
Okay, that's a really strong creative place to be at, where you can take, like, when the opportunity presents itself, you're set up to jump on it.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really cool thing. And so a couple of the guys are dropping in. They're already starting to drop questions in the chat, but we're going to get to them in a second. But they actually dropped that somebody saw in the Marvel previews for May that you've got Hulk Annual 1 and a story in Darth Vader Black, White, and Red.
Yeah, and Extreme Venomverse.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So yeah, May is a very busy month, and there may actually be some other stuff coming in May that hasn't been announced yet. So
Nice.
but yeah, that's May is looking like a very busy month post Savage Avengers.
Cool.
Second trade of which I believe is also coming out in May. So,
Oh, nice. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
lots coming out that month.
Nice. So, okay. So and this is just a real quick side question, because I do want to get into the works themselves, but I've really enjoyed this, talking through kind of your creative lifestyle and how you build it. Well, there was two things. So the first, how do you structure like your personal life? If you're doing like afternoon, evening stuff, like how does that?
Well, I'm very fortunate that my partner also works freelance, so we both work from home. So
okay.
This would be a very difficult job. I think if I was just alone by myself all day every day, but it's kind of nice, that we sort of have a sort of a working family unit, during the day. That's the two of us and our puppy, and sort of we have opportunities to leave the apartment, when we need to.
Nice.
I go to the gym, Ruby goes to daycare, my partner goes to various events that she covers for her work, but also like we like each other's company, so like I think beyond that, I mean, I'm really fortunate that like, and I think this comes from my time at Newsarama, that like I'm very comfortable with having online friends.
Right.
Some of my best friends are people that I met at Newsarama, who I still talk with every single day.
Nice.
So that kind of it's sort of the equivalent of like an office, online.
Yeah.
Kind of, we're all sort of in have similar interests and similar enough fields that we're able to like talk shop and hang out. I think beyond that, I think beyond that, it's just making sure that like I take time to like take care of myself, like take care of my health, and make sure that I'm there for like my partner and people who need me. And otherwise, like, my job is putting nose to grindstone, and it's really just about juggling different projects and making sure that like my goal is to never leave anybody hanging.
Okay.
I know as the writer, I'm often the bottleneck for a lot of stuff, and
gotcha.
so that's sort of how I triage my life and my work. Is it's kind of like who do I owe the work to? If there's an artist on board, it means that I want to make sure that I've got I'm pretty far ahead. I try to stay at least a script ahead of an artist at any given moment. I've been very fortunate that, knock on wood, at this part of my career, I've never had an artist waiting for me for scripts.
That's pretty rare, isn't it?
I don't know. It's one of those things. It's hard for me to like ask other creators, like, hey, do you like, are there artists waiting for you? But I think it's. I'm sure there are times where like, artists are kind of outpacing the writers because, we as writers, we're juggling a bunch of different projects and
right.
Really laser focused on one at a time. I don't want to be that guy. And so my goal is to not be that guy for as long as I can not be that guy.
Yeah.
But that's also like, this thing that I'm working on right now, like there's no artist attached. And so I'm kind of like, all right, if it's just me and my editors, they have not like told me like, this is like, we have a deadline to hit at this point. So I can be like, all right, like I'm not like sweating this as there's a script that's due next week, whereas There's some other project that I'm working on right now that hasn't been announced yet. Actually, I have two that haven't been announced yet that are like I'm still working on the scripts, and I'm kind of like keeping a very close eye on my artists on that one, on those where I'm like, all right, I know I've turned in issue 2 of this particular project, and my artist is about halfway through issue 1. All right,
Okay.
I know that I've probably got a good month and a half to 2 months before
Right,
I
right.
put in another script.
Gotcha.
And so that's sort of how I structure my life. But if you're asking like, do I take vacation? No. The answer is no. Conventions, that's pretty much the closest I get to vacations these days.
Very cool. Well, those are fun. I mean, do you enjoy going to comic conventions?
Yeah, I like them a lot. I mean, the vibe has certainly changed post COVID.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, and also I think the way that I approach cons has changed. It was one thing when I had one book. It's very easy to just sell one book because that's you focus entirely on that.
Right.
Another creator I know, Russell Nahelty, he used to tell me this, and I didn't believe him, but now I believe him. He said, the more books that you have in your table, like, it does get harder to juggle all of them.
Right, right.
And so the way that I try to circle that square is, the work that I am doing, I'm really trying to kind of bridge a bunch of different genres, because that way, if I don't have one specific, silver bullet to sell, maybe I can be a little more like Baskin Robbins, where I have something for everybody.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's really that's sort of become my new ethos. Especially now that I'm at Marvel, is trying to sort of just diversify as best I can, and hope that I can deliver something that's something for everybody.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. That absolutely makes a lot of sense. Well, speaking of something for everyone, let's go and let's jump into the, some of the different titles that you've got out.
Sure.
The guys had dropped those titles. I actually wasn't aware of the previews that have come out, but that's really cool. That's cool. It looks like you're branching out at Marvel, but we'll get to that in a second. So tell me a little bit. So chronologically, which of your projects was like the first one that you put in?
Spencer and Locke was my first book. We did 2 volumes of that, and we're hoping to do a third. We just need to get the rights back from the publisher.
Okay.
I did a book called Going to the Chapel that came out right after.
That's right.
Spencer and Locke 2. Then I did my Kickstarter project for the OZ, and then right off of that did Scout's Honor with Aftershock, and I think those books all together, that was sort of the critical mass that kind of got me through at Marvel. And so I worked in Savage Avengers. I remember Elektra Black, White, and Blood came out, and Moon Knight Black, White, and Blood came out. I don't remember. I think Avengers Unlimited came out first for the Marvel Unlimited app, and then Fantastic Four, and then just recently I just did a Spider-Man story in Spider-Verse Unlimited that just came out last week for Valentine's Day.
Oh, cool.
And then just the projects you've seen in the May previews, this Hulk annual, Extreme Venomverse, Darth Vader, Black, White, and Red, and various anthology stories that have come out. Nightmare Theater horror anthology, Project Big Hype, Cthulhu is Hard to Spell, the Help anthology that the Hero Initiative did. I feel like I'm missing something, but you guys can look it up on my website. But that seems to be the broad strokes, at least.
Yeah. No, I mean it's a growing library, definitely for sure. So you, I guess, okay. So with Spencer and Locke, how did it being your first? What was the biggest lesson you learned on that property? Well, and why don't you give us a synopsis of the volumes 1 and 2, kind of what the overarching story is?
Yeah. Well, the quick elevator pitch for the book is, what if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City? It's about a hard-boiled police detective whose partner is his childhood imaginary friend.
Hmm.
It was sort of, I grew up reading Calvin and Hobbes. It was one of my grandfather's favorites before he passed. And so I just remember thinking about it, for a long time I was an only child. There's almost a 9-year gap between me and my younger siblings. And so I remember being an only child and I didn't have an imaginary friend. I made real people friends.
Yeah.
And I kind of was thinking about it. I was like, well, what if that wasn't a charming quirk? What if that was a symptom of a darker pathology? And what would, and what would this guy's home life have looked like if he carried that imaginary friend to adulthood? And so that sort of became the story. It became a story about childhood trauma and mental illness. And
right. Yeah.
Your mind will go to protect itself from harm. And so, we did a first volume of that, and then we did a second volume where we sort of explored across the funny pages. We did a sort of an evil analog of Beetle Bailey as sort of Travis Bickle by way of Heath Ledger's Joker for our villain for the second volume. And we're looking to do sort of our riffs on Garfield and Peanuts for the third volume whenever we're able to sort of get the ball rolling on that. I think as far as lessons learned, I think it was, this was a positive thing. This was maybe less of a lesson and more of just sort of a belief that got confirmed. But it's just, you leave no stone unturned. We really promoted that book hyper aggressively. And I think my time as a comics journalist and my time in publicity, I think really kind of helped me learn the lay of the land as far as how do you go about doing that? How do you write a press release? What is it that a reviewer or a comics journalist is going to want to consider covering your work? And also by virtue of me being able to say, hey, I'm David Pepose. You might know me from my work over at Newsarama. I want you to know I'm a big fan of your work because I read all these people's sites. I have a book that's going to be announced, at New York Comic Con, and I wanted to see if you guys might be willing, might be available to cover it. And here's the embargo. Here's the whole first issue PDF. Here's some preview art. Things like that. Trying to just sort of lower the barrier of entry and to just give people a reason to cover us and make it as easy on them as possible. And then just hitting up as many different places as possible. And that's why I don't really turn down a whole lot of interviews. I don't talk with alt-right people, but beyond that, I really try to be open, and my feeling is no platform is too small.
Right.
I feel like if one person is convinced that they want to buy my work off of an interview, that was time well spent.
Yep.
So,
yep.
I feel like that was, I think, the big lesson was just, especially for your first book, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to your collaborators to really kind of beat the drum as loudly as you can. I think oftentimes creators say, oh, well, am I promoting too hard? Am I annoying people? And if you're annoying people, they weren't going to buy the book. I really I'm a big believer that as long as you're not obnoxious about it, don't be a jerk. Don't be annoying. But I think there's a way that frequency you can still promote frequently without being obnoxious or annoying about it.
Right. Yeah.
That's sort of the balance that you kind of want to hit.
Sorry, we got a troll in the chat. Just popping this person. Let me drop him in timeout. So that's really, really true, and it's something that's interesting to me that let's see. It's interesting to me because I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought on that one.
Sure.
But so the Spencer and Locke, I'm really excited about that one. I'd picked that one up on Comixology, like I'd told you ahead of time. and so I'm looking forward to being able to flip through that one and read it. It's much more. I like the way y'all approached it, and it's really neat that y'all are still, I think, kind of wanting to come back to it and continue on with those.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make sure that we had a few minutes, because it looks like there's more Marvel projects that I'd like to touch on.
Sure.
But I wanted to see about Scout's Honor. I wanted to definitely talk about that one, because Scout's Honor was actually the one that that had caused me to look you up and to reach out to you for the interview.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you tell the viewers about it? I've covered it before on my show on like Monday Hauls, which is where we show off books that we've picked up, and I'll give mini reviews sometimes. And so I've covered it, but it's been a little while since it had come out. So why don't you give us like kind of the overall gist of it, and then we'll talk a little bit about it, and then we'll get to the Marvel stuff.
Yeah. Scout's Honor, it's sort of Mad Max meets the Hunger Games.
Yeah.
It's years after a nuclear war, a cult has risen from the ashes, and their Bible is an old Boy Scout manual.
Yeah.
And so this story follows Kit, who's a young initiate of the Ranger Scouts of America. Only Kit has a secret. This cult is patriarchal and only allows men to serve. And so Kit has had to conceal her identity as a woman in order to pursue her calling as a Ranger Scout.
Yeah.
And what happens to Kit when she finds out the whole cult was built on a lie?
Yeah.
And is an interesting project. I think some of the it felt a lot like coming full circle. One of my editors on the book was Mike Martz, who I interned for. He was the Batman editor at the time. And so, I'd known Mike for a long time, and Christina Harrington, who really championed our book. She's a wonderful, wonderful editor. I can't say enough good things about her. And so, that project, was interesting. I have never really pitched a project quite like Scout's Honor before, and I think it's because I've never really pitched a publisher like Aftershock before, which is rather than sort of having a whole book prepared, having your whole team assembled, having a pitch ready. The way that Aftershock really liked to do things was they would say, listen, give us like a series of log lines, give us like 10 concepts. Well, maybe not 10 concepts. I sent them 10 concepts, but give us a couple of concepts, and we can tell you if we like any particular one of them, and then you can kind of flesh it out. And so for me, I sent them a whole bunch of concepts, and Scout's Honor was actually the one that I had sort of come up with like the day before, just thinking like thinking of the ideas of Bibles, and what's the weirdest thing that could be used as a Bible. And I was like, well, it's either a Boy Scout manual or a D&D manual. And I'm glad I didn't go for the D&D approach. That would have been a very different book. And of course, the one that I had done next to no research and really had no development on, that was the one that Aftershock's like, yeah, we really like that one. Can you flesh that one out? Of course. So I took like a month and really kind of like let it percolate and sort of dashed out a pretty quick outline. And much to my surprise, having been shot down by Aftershock many times before on many other more developed projects, they were like, yeah, we really like that one. And, the wild thing about that book is, so I signed the contract for it officially. It was like 2 weeks before everything shut down with COVID.
Oh, wow.
I had flown to my parents' house in Missouri for a funeral. And we were only starting to hear rumblings of COVID. It was one of those, we were coming for the service, it was before COVID really spread, but we were hearing, it had just hit Seattle. And I remember having a phone call with an editor that weekend and I said, oh, am I going to see you at Emerald City? And he was like, nobody's seen anybody at Emerald City. That show's getting shut down.
That's right. Because Emerald City was the first big shutdown. Yeah.
So I signed that contract for Scout's Honor, and really I'd written the first issue at that point when I signed the contract, but I was digging into issue 2 and beyond while everything is shutting down. and that was like that was a weird process, but I think it was a way for me to kind of help um, kind of process, the pandemic and how crazy everything was going with that. And I think between that and the OZ's Kickstarter, those two processes really kind of helped ground me a little bit during some times in history that were particularly less than grounding.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it's funny, like Scouts Honor, it felt like an unlikely book for me. I mean, I think a lot of people, when Going to the Chapel came out, I think people that did perk people's ears up a little bit. They're like, oh, he's not like just a grim and gritty guy. Like he might have some range. But Scouts Honor, I think, kind of really synthesized a lot of my various interests. And I think we kind of really brought a pretty diverse coalition of readers together. Yeah. And I know that was the book that kind of got Tom Brevoort and C.B. Cebulski's attention. I had been in contact with him for years, even back to when Spencer and Locke first came out. And I think that was the book that kind of made Marvel realize, like, okay, he's not going away. So maybe if he's not going away, maybe we should just hire him already.
Right. Very cool. So you, yeah, that's so interesting to hear about that, because I had not heard that it was but I guess, doesn't that happen a lot? Sometimes creatively, where the one that that you just kind of spit out happens to gain traction and it turns into a full.
Well, so I think it's less. I mean, it's not that I didn't have passion for Scouts Honor. I think it was the project that maybe took the longest for me to warm up to.
Right.
And I think that's just because oftentimes when I come up with a project, I mean, I come up with ideas every single day, but only, a small percentage of them are worth pursuing beyond that moment.
Yeah.
It's really, my thinking is, if I can remember it a month from now or 6 months from now, then it's got some legs, because I spit out ideas all the time. But I think, for Scouts Honor, it was one of those, like, I hadn't really had the time to warm up to it. I that was one of the few ideas that, like, I hadn't really done that long-term stress test. And so I was a little nervous when they went for it. But that was a project that, like, over the course of writing it, I really fell in love with it. And I really was kind of like, okay, like, Kit, sort of seeing, like, her crisis of faith. I was like, that's really interesting to me. And that's something that, like, really resonates with me.
Yeah.
And seeing, like, Dez and sort of his kind of tragic arc, I was like, okay, that's something, like, I really feel that. And most people who are familiar with my work, like, know that I love writing those kinds of kind of tragic characters. And so that fit well. And working with artist Luca Casalanguida, he's a tremendous artist, just really spectacular. And so, seeing how he kind of realized this world, I was like, all right, like, it was a project that I was really nervous about, but, like, wound up feeling very proud of as it came out.
Oh, cool.
I think you're right in the sense that, like, I certainly didn't expect that it was going to kind of get a following the way that it did.
Yeah.
And that was really heartening and validating for me, for sure.
Very cool. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that what caused me to gravitate towards it was that it was an exploration of the concept of holy texts in a way that I hadn't seen before. Because generally people always go for, one of the kind of established holy texts, but this idea of building a world around a scout manual, and then kind of exploring the idea of patriarchy and, kind of that it was just a really cool concept. So what are a couple, just real quick, a couple of the elements, like, world building wise? Because to me, like, on this side of it, as a reader, it felt like a very strongly developed story world, with lots of little touches that I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. What were, like, two of the, just maybe pick out two of the little elements, like story elements, that you were, proud of or excited about how they turned out? Or
Okay. that I was proud of how it turned out. Um, well, so for me, a lot of the research that I did, my younger brothers were both Boy Scouts, and I think that
Okay.
I wasn't, and I think that sort of sense of like this seems off to me, this could be a cult. That was sort of
Yeah, yeah.
the kernel that became Scouts Honor. I'm trying to think of the things that the commandments of Dr. Jefferson Hancock, which we took from like the actual Boy Scout laws. I
Right.
was really proud of that. I think that was like a really cool way to kind of like anchor the whole series, with a real ethos. Another moment is probably me. This was sort of me being a hoity-toity artiste. But there was a part in issue 3, I believe it was, where Kit is drugged and thrown into a well, and
Mhm.
she sees visions of her dead father, and she has to kind of like accept that like her father accepted her, and like that she shouldn't feel guilt over the path that she's taken, from
Right.
being a Ranger Scout and also trying to bring truth to this society,
Right.
or really trying to confirm the truth behind the society. And so we have a moment where she climbs out of the well, and that was me being a hoity-toity artiste. That there's a painting of truth coming out of her well, and that was sort of my little fine arts homage. Um,
Nice.
nobody caught that, but I was really proud of how it turned out. Um, I think there are other elements. There's a bit in issue 2. Um, there were a couple scenes in issue 2 that really like I think turned out really beautifully in a way that I didn't really expect.
Yeah.
Kit and Dez kind of like hanging out on like the rooftops and like
Right.
talking.
Right.
I really loved how that turned out. And then Kit kind of making her way through the Marauders. Um, the Highwaymen. That's what they were
Yeah.
originally Marauders, and then Marvel came out with the Marauders series, and I had to change that quickly. The Highwaymen, her mowing through them, in issue 2, like I thought turned out really nicely. So yeah, that's those are some moments that I was really proud of. But it was really just coming down to like the Boy Scout manual, and just the Boy Scouts have a lot of iconography that I was able to
Yeah.
pull.
Yeah. Yeah.
That really kind of made this series particularly fun and engaging for me as a writer.
Very cool. So I was going to show you this. You might get a kick out of these. Let me show them to you. My local comic shop had put these in my box.
Oh, dope!
So
That's
yeah,
cool.
I've got a few of them from
Oh,
that.
nice. That's really cool.
Yeah, I don't think it's all of them, but they
No, we
have.
actually we came out with 13 of them.
Okay.
Some of
Okay.
them were some of them were like retailer exclusive. I think there were a couple that were Comic Pro exclusive.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, there was a lot.
Okay, okay, that's cool. I'll have to look for some of them.
Yeah,
But yeah, they had stuck those in my box because I had it on my pull list. I think after the first issue, and yeah, there's my individual
nice.
ones. So just thought you get a kick out of that.
Yeah, yeah.
So okay, so moving on to the Marvel. And I see some guys have dropped some stuff in the chat here, so we're pretty close to getting into some of the questions that they've got. But okay, so Savage Avengers is such an interesting concept. The idea of this barbarian out of time
Yeah.
teaming with with Avengers and going on these missions. So, like, tell me a little bit about like what was your reaction to that like I guess first call or that first contact about it,
Yeah.
and how did
Um,
it go from there?
yeah, that was my first call from Marvel. So I felt my soul leave my body when that email hit. I distinctly remember, like, I see the email from Tom Brevoort just saying a possible Marvel project,
Yeah.
and he did not tell me what it was at all.
Okay.
I had to fill out some paperwork. Basically, like, if Marvel's working on an idea similar to the idea that you pitch us, like it's purely coincidental, and
Right. Right.
can't sue us. So like they didn't even tell me what the thing was. And I remember my puppy Ruby like immediately sensed something changed in the room. She pounced on me. She was very excited with the email. And so, I fill it out, and I'm thinking, I'm excited. Like maybe like it's an anthology story, or maybe if I'm really lucky, it's a one shot, or can I even imagine a mini series? And then they email and they're like, so Jerry Dugan is wrapping up his run on Savage Avengers, and we wanted to see if you had any ideas on how to, on a relaunch. And I love the Avengers. I've wanted to write an Avengers book for quite some time. My earliest fan scripts were Avengers scripts, including Daredevil, Cloak, and Dagger, all of whom became members of my Savage Avengers squad. So I was like, oh, this is the dream job. Like, yes, 100%.
Yeah.
And I remember at first, the only thing that kind of I was hesitant about was I was like, Conan, like I didn't grow up with Conan the way that I grew up with like Marvel characters.
Right.
I was like, why me? Like, why are they asking me on this book? And then I realized it like kind of hit me like, oh, that's because Savage Avengers is the mashup book. It's fantasy with superheroes, and like all my work are mashup books.
Right. Okay.
I'm the mashup guy. Okay, I get this. Like this, and that then it perfectly made sense. And I think it helped that this sort of the serendipity of it all. I had a Conan idea, one in my back pocket for years, and it was before Marvel took over the licensing rights. I was thinking to myself, I'm a big fan of the Terminator movies, big Arnold Schwarzenegger fan, and I was just thinking to myself, like, what if there was like an in-universe reason why like Conan the Barbarian and the Terminator had the same face? And I was thinking, oh well, what if the Terminators started molding themselves on the scariest human they had ever fought? And so I was like, oh, what if the Terminator, like, they had a Terminator go in the time platform, but the time platform got shorted. And so the Terminator wound up in the Hyborian Age, like hunting down like John Connor's like ancient relative, Conan the Barbarian. And
Nice.
so I came up with like an outline for it. This was years ago. And literally like the week after I finished the outline, Marvel announced that they had the rights to Conan the Barbarian. And so I was like, well, file that away. I guess that's just never going to be a thing. Or maybe I'll like have to file the serial numbers off and make it a like creator owned kind of thing.
Right.
So when Tom emails me about like, hey, do you have any ideas for Conan? I was like, actually, I do. I was like, what if we did Conan versus the Terminator, but we had Deathlock as sort of the Marvel equivalent.
Right. Yeah.
And we could have them. It's sort of a sword and sorcery Terminator over the Hyborian Age. And since it's an Avengers book, we can have a couple of superheroes that have to get caught in the crossfire, and they all got shanghaied back to the Hyborian Age, and so they got to find their way home.
Nice.
And, Tom, it was one of the fastest yeses I've ever gotten in this business.
Wow.
But it's funny, I did not know it was a yes until much later. I didn't actually know that I thought I was like, maybe it's a bake off, or, they were just feeling me out. I didn't really, now that I've worked with Tom for a while, I kind of know his process a bit, and know that like when, at least historically, when he reaches out to me, that like, this is not a bake off. It's like him saying like, this is a job that I think you can do.
Right.
So I didn't know I had Savage Avengers until Carlos Magno was brought in the book. I turned in, I had done the whole outline. I had done, I had negotiated for a cast. I wrote the first issue, and, based on that was sort of my process for Scout's Honor, was I had done all that. And then they said, okay, yeah, we like this. You have the book. That was not the case at Marvel. Now I realize in retrospect, if you get that far, you have the book.
Yeah.
So they were like, oh, here's Carlos Magno. He's going to be drawing the book. And I was like, so is it me? Do I have to draw the book? And even then I never asked Tom. I was just like, well, once they announce the book, then I guess I have the book.
Right.
But it was a long, let's see, July. They announced it in February. So that was a good 9 months, 8 or 9 months of white knuckled terror. But yeah, it was such a wonderful experience. We just wrapped up the series. The 10th and final issue just came out this week. And that sort of was like the end of kind of like the meta arc that I had hammered out with Tom. Was sort of they start off in the Hyborian Age, and sort of Conan versus Deathlock, and kind of reawakening the hero whose corpse had been used to build this Deathlock. And we found out kind of early on that the rights weren't going to be extended for Conan the Barbarian. And so I thankfully kind of in my initial pitch, I was like, well, if Conan is in the Hyborian Age, like we can always just leave him there, like easy way to kind of bring him home. So we did that. And as our heroes kind of like jump back in the time stream to theoretically go back to their home era, it turns out that they overshot. And so they wind up in the year 2099. Their time traveling exploits have kind of broken the time stream. And so this is not the 2099 that you know. It's ruled by Ultron, and he has an army of Deathlocks. And so it's sort of our Terminator 2 in 3D of the series. And we got to kind of swap in Punisher 2099 as sort of the new lead of the book, along with our Deathlock and our team of heroes. And yeah, I mean, it was a dream job. I really can't say enough good things about it. Nice. Carlos Magno is just a tremendous artist. He did 10 issues in a row with no breaks. He was an artist who I was like really like racing to keep ahead of at any given moment. He would turn in these beautifully detailed pages like clockwork every, I think, 4 to 6 weeks. So working with Tom, he's the best editor I've ever had. In fact, I sent him a thank you note when Savage Avengers 10 came out, and I was just like, I'm working on some more projects with him that haven't been announced yet, but I was just like, I'll work with you guys for as long as you'll have me. Like, it was a really wonderful working relationship. I think in part because I think Tom sees a lot of things. He sees the theory, behind a lot of it. So it's all I can do not to like try to talk shop with him, because I know he's busy with a million other projects and a million other creators. But he's very smart, and he's almost like a diagnostician in terms of story elements. And so I already put myself through my paces, and then Tom puts me through my paces further. Nice. And by the end of it, we come up with something really cool. So I love working with him. It's working on a dream project. I wanted Cloak and Dagger to be Avengers for since like 2009, and so like being the guy who finally did it.
Yeah,
that's cool.
That is cool.
And like the fact that like they've like made out once or twice, but like Cloak and Dagger have never been like a couple, and like and I'm like, that's insane to me. They're literally joined by an ampersand, like and so like I know there were people who were very upset that we put Cloak and Dagger in a love triangle, and I'm hoping that they realize, like, in retrospect, now that they've read the whole thing, like the whole character arc was to bring Tyrone and Tandy together. We just had to throw some obstacles in the way to like but boy, there were a lot of people who were really mad that we had Anti-Venom and Dagger as a couple for a little while. But it was just to kind of show like they don't fit. You're right, they don't work.
Right.
They are absolutely not a match. But you don't want to spoil the story before it comes out. It was a big learning curve for me though. Just kind of learning like how do you kind of deal with the traffic grid of a shared universe. How do you roll punches for that?
I was gonna ask you, because something you said sparked. I just wanted to throw this in there real quick. So you said that you had to negotiate to get the characters you wanted on the team. Can you just share a little bit about the shared universe? And I feel like you were going there. I just wanted to make sure to kind of get that. Well,
so and when I say negotiate, maybe not negotiate is like I have to like make deals, but just to sort of figure, like, who's available and who isn't. So I was lucky that the vast majority of the characters that I had asked for were all available. Deathlock was kind of having a moment in Jason Aaron's Avengers run, so it was easy to sort of there's a Deathlock army at the end of time. one of the Deathlocks has been sent back to take care of Conan because his presence in the present has, it's a crime against the time stream.
Right.
And I'd asked for Elektra as Daredevil, and I was, because I thought what Chip Zdarsky has done with her has been phenomenal. It's been like the coolest that Elektra has ever been. And so I was really thrilled when they were like, "Oh yeah, she'll still be Daredevil." Like, yeah, you can deal with that, especially with our story being time travel. It lets us kind of dance between the raindrops continuity wise.
Right.
I asked for Cloak and Dagger. I begged them for Cloak and Dagger, and I was told nobody has any plans with Cloak and Dagger. You're fine. I specifically said in the pitch document, I said if there's any characters, I will go to the mat to beg and plead for. It's Cloak and Dagger because I've wanted them to be Avengers for so long, and I had some ideas of like how we could kind of like leverage their powers, and sort of add new wrinkles to it to really make them like a force to be reckoned with. I talked about Black Knight. He was the one I was the least sure about, and he was the one that Tom really kind of nudged me to like, you should definitely keep him on board. He's going to be in Eternals, so like, this is sort of the biggest rating that Dane has had ever. And I'm really glad that he encouraged me to keep him because Dane wound up kind of becoming my Swiss Army knife in terms of a lot of story. It's like he's a genius who's got tech in areas that you might not have tech, but he's also got like, sort of a little bit of a mystical element, but he also is the continuity guy. Like he's been an Avenger. So, any continuity stuff you need, he's the guy who would organically know it. The characters that required a little bit of negotiation was involving Flash Thompson, Anti-Venom, and Weapon H. I had pitched this as I was like, well, I want to have sort of like a logical offshoot of Jerry Dugan's original roster of Savage Avengers. And that was, those who don't remember, it was Wolverine, Punisher, Elektra, Dr. Voodoo, and Venom. I believe that's it. I don't think I'm missing anything. And so I was like, I really want to have at least three of those characters, like analogs of those three of those characters to make it.
Right.
And I had been told very early on, like Frank Castle's off the board. Because he's sort of going on his own journey in Jason Aaron's run with the hand. We didn't want to do Logan because he was doing his own time travel adventure in Lives and Deaths of Wolverine. Venom, Eddie Brock, he was kind of doing his own thing with, Donny Cates' run.
Yeah.
So, and I love Dr. Voodoo, but like I didn't think he was like the right fit for this particular thing. So we had Elektra. And so I was like, all right, well, what if we had like Daken, Dark Wolverine, and Carnage? And I was told, well, we might be able to get Daken, but Carnage is like a tough sell. I didn't know any of this, but like, there was all sorts of stuff brewing in, Rom V's a series for Carnage, and you can see like he's got stuff coming out with like Carnage Reigns later. And so like Carnage was kind of off the table. And then we found out that Daken was also off the table because he was going to be in Marauders.
Gotcha.
So I was like, well, what about Flash Thompson? He totally works as a symbiote guy. And I was told, yeah, we can definitely use Flash. It took a little back and forth to find somebody with claws. And I was like, we need somebody with claws. Like that really feels like kind of the promise of Savage Avengers is like we have all the kind of gritty heroes in one book. And I'm fine using legacy characters, but like we need somebody in there.
Yeah.
And Tom was the one that was like, well, what about Weapon H? And my initial knee-jerk reaction was like, what? And then I took a second. I was like, actually, that makes perfect sense. He's not just half Wolverine, he's half Hulk, which are very savage. Marvel's arguably most savage heroes.
Right.
They fit. I was kind of like, oh, that feels almost like an oversight that there was never a Hulk on the Savage Avengers.
Yeah.
So I remember pitching to Tom. I said, well, I have an idea as a wrinkle for him that I think could make him like stand out. What if we did kind of dial H for Hulk? Like, his gamma generators have been kind of damaged. And so now like he's able to tap into the different gamma frequencies so he can, he's not just a Hulk. He can turn into a Harpy or a Leader or a Red Hulk or an Abomination, kind of based on what the situation requires. So he's more of a utility player now. So that really kind of worked out well. But yeah, it took a little bit to kind of figure out, like, okay, like I can't use these particular characters because somebody else is using them. That's stuff that I run into fairly regularly.
Right.
And probably the toughest part of the job is saying, all right, well, can I use, like I've pitched MODOK so many times, and I finally got him in Savage Avengers as sort of like a Deathlock version of MODOK in the party. But I've pitched MODOK so many times and been told, well, he's being used here, he's being used here. Or, for my Fantastic Four 2-parter, like it was really, it took us a while to like lock down a villain because I was just like, I don't know who's being used where. And it was Tom who was like, what about Weebly at Midas? And immediately I was like, yep, that's it. That's perfect. That's like, she's a perfect mirror to Sue Storm. So that's sort of the big learning curve, I think, for me but the thing that I'm sort of still learning, I've been here a little shy of 2 years now, is not to feel guilt about that. Like that's your editor's job, is sort of, they have like the bird's eye view picture. They know where all the bodies are buried. They know everything that's going on. And for many reasons, the creators are sort of a little more siloed off. And I think that's good. It sort of keeps everybody's hands clean. There's no risk of like anybody getting jealous or anybody kind of stepping on somebody else's stuff.
Right.
It's sort of just, you ask the editor and the editor will tell you if that's available. And you sort of trust your editors to kind of know where all the bodies are buried. But it does take a little bit of back and forth. And I've called editors before of just like, I'm really sorry that this is like, I feel like I'm taking up all your bandwidth here. And they're like, that's the job, man. Like it's their job is not just sort of like casting the creative team and keeping the trains running on time. It's also just like keeping track of this crazy shared universe.
Right.
Because have any one creator probably can't do it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's just with such a library of characters, I can't even imagine.
It's a lot.
Yeah, that is a lot. Well, let's. I wanted to see. Did you have anything notable you wanted to point out about? I know we're excited about seeing the Hulk Annual 1 and the story in Darth Vader, Black, White, and Red, and then the Venom project you mentioned. Anything you wanted to mention about those, like upcoming projects?
Yeah, well, I'm really excited for those coming out. Hulk is a really fun one. We're doing kind of a found footage Hulk story. A documentary team is doing is making a movie about sort of like the legacy of Bruce Banner, and they're investigating kind of a small New Mexico town that has ties to the Hulk. And sort of the story is like what happens when they accidentally actually find him. And sort of it's seeing kind of a human eye view in the eye of the storm, of what a Hulk encounter might look like. And I worked with editor Will Moss on that, and he was really cool to work with on that. So I'm excited to see how that one comes together. We're still kind of putting the art together on that one, so I don't know what it looks like any more than you guys do. And Vader has been really fun. I probably have to keep my lips tight on that one a little bit, only because, like, when you're dealing with like outside licensors, you never want to kind of like overstep with what you're saying.
Right.
Announced, and all they've announced is it's my debut on Star Wars. But I'm working with a really cool artist on it. Somebody who I've really dug for a long time. Somebody who I actually had brought up as a possible Savage Avengers contender back in the day. So I was really excited when Mark Panacea, the editor, told me like, oh, hey, this person's available. And Extreme Venomverse, that was a fun one. It was a really interesting challenge. This is sort of, usually when I do stuff at Marvel, it's sort of me, the editors are coming to me saying, hey, do you have any ideas for this character? Do you have any ideas for, like when I did the Moon Knight anthology, you want to do a Moon Knight story, pitch us any idea you got. Or same thing with Avengers Unlimited. for the Venomverse, this was sort of a character who was brought to me. Devin Lewis was like, listen, we're doing sort of, a multiverse of Venoms, so to speak. And we have a character that we would really like for you to flesh out. We thought it would be really cool to do kind of a riff on the 90s Cyborg Spider-Man by doing kind of what would happen if the Venom symbiote was shackled to a shield LMD. And so it was called the LMV, the life model Venom. And so like it was interesting kind of trying to figure out how to circle that square a little bit. And so it took a little bit of back and forth, and we did it over the holidays, so it was even crazier. But that as far as I know, all three of those projects, like the art is still coming together, so I have not actually seen the art on any of it. Although I have seen Ken Lashley's design of the LMV, and it looks the same as the cover that's been released. It looks really cool. So that was like a fun project. And as somebody who, my very first comic was Spider-Man versus Venom, so like getting to write anything Venom related was like super cool. And this was very much a love letter to the 90s. And so you'll kind of see that a bit in the story and hopefully in the art. And I've got a few other things that are in the hopper that I can't quite talk about yet, but keep your eyes peeled. My next two Marvel projects are both really fun labors of love, and I'm kind of excited for readers to get to see me branching out into some other kind of corners of the Marvel universe.
Very cool. Well, man, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm definitely going to be that Hulk annual one sounds really cool, and so I think I'm going to pick some of those up, and it's very 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 cool stuff. So okay, so I want to make sure and get into. How are you on time? Because we're okay. So we do have some questions in the chat, and I want to make sure and get to those folks. Just a real quick note to those who are in the chat, thank y'all so much for popping in and out. If you're watching this on the rewind, we're glad that you caught it. If you're watching here in the chat, now is the point where I want you to start dropping questions in the chat, and I'm going to go back up a little bit to make sure I get all of them, but we're going to try to get through as many of these questions as we can, because we're just excited to get to hang out and chat with David. So David, so let's see, where are we at? Okay, so pretty early on, Mr. Collector 123 asks if you can work with any artist or another writer to team up with for a project, who would it be and why?
That's a good question. I wish I had a good answer for this. It's funny because I think for me, it's also I'm going to broaden this question a little bit. Maybe it's a little bit cheap because I feel like cover artists is really kind of a big thing for me. I feel like I think by virtue of like the way that I've worked on like the OZ, like I often, I consider working with people on covers just as important as working on interiors. Like I'd love to have like a Steve McNiven cover somewhere. I think he's done some really cool stuff on Moon Knight. Trying to think because it's like I've been really lucky that like a lot of people that I would have loved to have worked with, I actually have been able to work with in some capacity. Like I got a John Romita Jr. cover for Savage Avengers that like blew my mind. Daredevil, The Man Without Fear was like a seminal book for me. So like that was like amazing. And having Lionel Yu doing main covers, I was so excited.
That's right. Yeah.
Such a terrific book. Leonardo Romero was really high on the list, and I was really lucky to get to work with him on Moon Knight, Black, White, and Blood. I just got a Declan Shalvey cover for that Vader anthology. I've been friends with Declan for a long time, so that was super cool. And like I got a Gary Frank cover for Hulk Big fan of his. He's somebody who would have been really cool to work with in interiors.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think if there's anybody else. Giuseppe Camuncoli. He did some covers for Savage Avengers, but he's somebody I would really love to work with on interior. I don't know what it had to be the right project, but like Giuseppe is a really talented storyteller, and I think especially like you get the right acre on him, and it's like really cool looking stuff. So I guess that's probably the answer that I would go with is Camuncoli. Beyond that, I mean, I'd love to do a cover with Chris Sheehan from the Autumnal. He and I have talked about it. It's just kind of getting the schedules to align.
Right.
I really want him to do like a cover for the OZ if we can fit it in. Sky Patridge, same thing. But yeah, Camuncoli is probably a good answer. He's a terrifically talented artist, and I was so thrilled that he did some covers for Savage Avengers, and I would love to work with him on interiors if he was ever open for it.
Okay. So next question we got here is Amazing Spider Flint asks, how long does it take from your script submission to Marvel until the book is released?
It's a great question. It really does depend on the time frame, and it depends on if it's digital or print. Like the quickest turnaround we've probably had. My Spider-Man story was pretty quick. Spider-Verse Unlimited 37 just came out for Valentine's Day. They hit me up to write that. It was just before New Year's, and that came out for Valentine's Day.
Oh wow!
So that was kind of a 6-week turnaround, or maybe a little longer than that, 7 or maybe 8 weeks. That was probably the fastest turnaround I've ever had. Beyond that, it's usually from the time I write it to the time it comes out. I think the shortest amount of time is probably 4 months. I think it's usually more like I think a healthy like runway is usually 7 to 8 months.
Okay.
I was working on something in. Actually, I think it may even be maybe the 8-month mark, maybe 8 or 9 months even. I worked on something. I think it was in November or December that's coming out in July, and like I'm ahead. I've worked on scripts through August right now.
Okay.
And actually, well, yeah. I mean, we'll say for Marvel scripts. I mean, I have a creator-owned thing that's not even. I don't know when it's coming out. I assume it's later in the year. That like I'm halfway through, and as far as I know, I think that even brings me through like 2024. So yeah, there's usually a decent amount of runway. I think some of that is built in. Just you have to, when you're doing things with a printer, you have to build in some extra lead time. Or if you're doing things with retailers, there's usually I guess we're in May pre-orders right now, and it's February. So it's like that 3-month window that retailers need. So usually the script, I've never had anything announced that a script hasn't been written on yet. I do know that sometimes happens, but I don't have that kind of seniority yet. So anything that has been announced on my end, the script has already been written. I think only once had it been announced, but the script, while written, had not been fully approved.
Gotcha. Okay.
So there's always at least like a 3-month buffer. So really, you say 4 months at minimum.
Yeah.
But usually it's more the 7 to 8 month.
Right? Okay. This is like a follow-up question I have for you real quick. Do you keep any kind of like just as a matter of practice, do you keep any kind of like white space in your schedule for those last minute projects, or has that?
I just shift things around. In fact, In fact, like literally, like that's actually part of what I'm doing today. Is that like I got an email yesterday about like one of those kind of last minute projects.
Right.
It's short enough that I think I can fit it in. But literally, like the next thing I'm doing after this podcast is like I'm having a call with an editor to sort of discuss like what do you guys need, and like
Yeah.
what can you give me the parameters of this to see if like I can. It's a slightly chaotic week for me going into Emerald City next week, but I want to see if it's a short enough assignment. I want to see if I can make it work.
Right.
So that you just sort of you blow up your schedule, and you just you hope that you don't owe too many things pressing at any one time. But the number one skill of this job is triage, and so you just kind of figure out what's the most important priority right now, and you just kind of hope that everybody else will understand.
Very cool. So Weapon X asks, when you write, he inserted a joke in here as well. When you write, do you have an artist in mind? Like if you could choose McFarlane or Carlos Collects, who would be best to get your story across to the reader?
Well, Carlos Collects answers my emails, so the answer would be him. To answer your questions, it's anticlimactic, but it's one of those things. For me, it's really just important to like get the story out.
Yeah.
And once the story's out, then I can kind of take a look at it and just be like, all right, like what's the tone here? Who might be able to fit the tone? And I think that especially working at Marvel, that's particularly helpful because, where I'm at right now, I don't have a huge amount of say of who's drawing the book, which is fine because I think it's similar to like what characters are available. It's also like I don't know which artists are available, who's working on what, so it's very difficult. Like I think the only time that I've made that work was for Leo Romero on our Moon Knight short. I had said to Tom I'd give him like a laundry list of names that I thought could be cool, and Leo was the top, and he managed to. Leo happened to be free, and Tom has a relationship with him, so he managed to make it work.
Nice.
Okay. It's a little easier for covers where you can say like, hey, like I had done like a laundry list of cover names, and like Lionel was on the cover list, and so like Lionel got in, and Giuseppe was on the list, and so Giuseppe got in. I tend not to think of any specific artists because that's a fast way for me to get disappointed. For me, it's more just like I'll write the story and then I'll kind of work my way down of like, okay, is this like a cartoony story or is this like a gritty story or, and that sort of. But also like at Marvel, sometimes like artists are already selected before they talk to me. So for example, like the LMV story in Venomverse, like Ken Lashley was already attached before I was attached.
Okay.
And or sometimes like while I'm working on the script, the editor is sort of already reaching out to the artist without having read the script yet. So it's just some of that is just the time frame kind of goes up against like how you would want to do it, and you just kind of have to roll with it as best as you can, knowing that you have a deadline to hit. So I leave that to smarter people than me. For my creator-owned work, it's more of, once I finish a script, then it's kind of like, all right, I have an idea of tone, and then I'm constantly looking for new artists all the time. I'm always looking for like who is of professional quality,
right.
Who's ready for the prime time. And now that I've sort of gotten a little bit more established, it's also like who are people that I know who like have already put out books, or and so I can kind of network my way into those partnerships. But I think beyond that, I just leave it up to my editors because I know they've also got sort of promises to fulfill and ideas in their head, and a stable of people in their talent bench that they'll probably be tapping from.
Cool. Mr. Collector is back with another question. He says, do you have any favorite movies or TV shows that you enjoyed when you were younger that helped you with your creative writing today?
Sure. Well, Memento was one of my favorite movies for a long time, as was Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Those went into Spencer and Locke in a big way, and I do think in certain ways they have echoed through some of my other work. Trying to think what else. There honestly, for me, I mean, it's there's a lot of things that I've liked from when I was younger and even as an adult. And you'll see a lot of my work is very pop culture infused, and that's because like, oh, you know, they say like imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, but for me, I think like remixing is sort of
Mhm.
like the way that I show my fandom for things.
Yeah.
So if I'm a big fan of, you know, Frank Miller's Sin City and Bill Watterson's Calvin and Hobbes, like that's something that I kind of mash together. Going to the chapel, for example, you know, I built that as a Die Hard at a wedding. But really, like the big influence behind that was actually Dog Day Afternoon.
Mm.
That movie
Okay.
was really cool, and so like, you know, it's basically Dog Day Afternoon except it's set at a wedding. You know, so you know, or like I have a book that's sort of like long gestating Grand Theft Astro, where like the book has been written. It's just sort of getting the ducks in a row with our artists. Um,
Right. Right.
and you know, I was just like, well, I love the Fast and the Furious. So what if you did like Fast and the Furious meets Back to the Future in space? You know, like
Oh
that's
wow.
dope.
Nice.
So yeah, I think it's really on a project to project basis. But yeah,
Hmm.
I'm always kind of tapping in from like stuff that I really like. And that sort of kind of helps me distill like, well, what did I like about that? All right, that's something I'm going to inject into this particular story, while kind of trying to put my own individual spin on it, either for me as a creator with my own voice, or through the lens of any particular character,
Hmm.
sort of as that prism.
Very cool. He also goes on to ask, when developing characters, do you base any off family members or people you came across paths with in your life?
Only my enemies. No, I'm kidding. Um, I Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it happens. You know, from time to time. Um, I mean, I think you know, sometimes it's pop culture. You know, sometimes it's just actors.
Hmm.
Um, you know, it's. I think that that is more for creator owned than
Mm.
licensed. You know, when you're working on licensed properties, like the cool thing is like you kind of those characters are those characters, and you know those characters, and so you're able to,
Right.
you know, bounce what you already know. Um, but like yeah, I'm working on something right now, where like I was watching a TV show and I was kind of like, oh, this actor kind of could be like, in his performance could be like an interesting template for this particular character that I have in mind.
Mm.
And I know like um, Nick Spencer was talking about his Thunder Agents run a long time ago, where he was like Adam Brody was kind of like the character that he kind of modeled a character off of from Thunder Agents.
Right.
So,
Okay.
so yeah, that's kind of, it does happen. Less for the people I know, although you know, I mean, you know, the Fantastic Four, you know, that run with Sue Storm, um, you know, the narration is Reed narrating kind of like he's trying to figure out a solution to like the Celestials' judgment, but he's also, his way of working things out is, you know, it's through Sue. You know, that like whenever he thinks of Sue, the rest inevitably falls into place, and sort of thinking about like how his relationship with Sue has made him like a better scientist and made him like reach for the stars,
Mm.
and sort of everything that he has built as Mr. Fantastic wouldn't exist without Sue.
Mm.
And that was fairly autobiographical. I mean, I that was absolutely like a love letter to my partner, who, you know, she really kind of encouraged me to take this path,
Mm.
this career in writing. I think when we first met, I tinkered with scripts here and there, but I think pretty shortly after we met, I had an idea for a screenplay, and I was telling her about it over dinner, and she was really excited about it. And I was kind of
Mm.
at that dinner being like, I guess I have to write this thing. And so, you know, I write all my scripts for her, really. You know,
Yeah.
I always say there's really, I used to say there's two people, now there's three people. There's only three people that I care if I'm like, if these three people are happy with the script, then I feel good having done it. It's if
Mm.
I'm happy, my partner's happy, and Tom Brayford is happy. Um, you know, if the three of us like what I'm doing, then it passes the smell test to me. Um,
Nice.
so Tom is not my girlfriend, but like
Right.
you know, he's my creative dad. Yeah, I feel like that's kind of um, that I think I drew from real life.
Hmm.
I think beyond that, I mean, I think sometimes it's, I'm sure I draw personality traits that maybe I'm not always aware of.
Right.
But I always try to find something that I can relate to, maybe from my own past, not necessarily people that I know, but at least thematically, just like what's important to me as a human being.
Okay. That's cool. That's really cool. I like that. So last question from Mr. Collector. He says, what are your top 3 favorite comic book series or books that have come out in the last 10 years?
Did Afterlife with Archie come out in the last 10 years? I love that book. I'm going to say that it did. It is probably pretty borderline, but I think it was within the last 10 years, and I love that book. That was sort of the book that kind of like hit me over the edge to be like, all right, I'm going to try to write my own comic. Just because like seeing what you could do with like a squeaky clean iconography like Archie,
Right.
that really like opened my eyes in a big way. Let's see what else is really good. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm just like running through everything in my head. Oh, that wasn't 10 years. Dan Slott's Spider-Man, particularly like leading into Superior. I think that's just around the 10-year mark, but that's some really cool stuff. It's like one of those things. It's like, of course, I'm gonna like leave this interview and I want to come up with like a million other ideas.
What if we open it up to
Court of Owls? Scott's initial Batman arc really like blew the doors off, and it's something I really like. I study a lot. Those might be. No, Hawkeye is more than 10 years. Loved Hawkeye. Loved Gillen's Young Avengers. That's also more than 10 years. I swear I haven't been like in a cryo chamber for 10 years. I've just been under deadline for like 2 years straight. Donny Cates' Venom. That ruled. That was super. That was terrific. What are some of the things I know that I liked? I just read Joshua Williamson's new issue of Superman. I mean, that's not like I'm just going to say that's a comic I read recently that I thought was dope. I thought that was really terrific. The artist on that, Campbell, I'm trying to remember his first name. Jamal Campbell. That was it. I knew I got that.
Oh, yeah.
That guy is just a phenomenal artist. That guy rules.
He just did I think a Nightwing cover that I was a big fan of.
Oh, you know what? I don't know why I didn't think of this sooner. You know what? Tom King, man, that I love that guy. I think his Mr. Miracle and Human Target have been spectacular. The thing I love about Tom King, just to give him a little shout out, he really is. He loves playing around with different storytelling mechanics, and I that's something that I really kind of aspire to myself, like on an issue-to-issue basis, or an arc-to-arc basis for him. Like he always is trying like something new and interesting and different. Like he did like that Killing Time Batman book where like it was sort of a countdown. Like it was constantly like sort of checking like different times over a particular like night, I believe it was, and there was like a surprise punchline behind all that, and I was like, that's super cool. Like playing with structure is like a really cool thing, and I think Tom does that exceptionally well. I'll throw the Vision in there as well. I don't remember if that was 10 years or not, but boy, that book was stellar. Those are the ones that come to mind right now, but ask me literally on any given day and I will probably have a different answer for you.
Yeah. Well, that's a good broad cross section there, though.
Oh, you know what? I'll throw out one more book that just did not get enough love, and I'm still bummed that they had to wrap it up. Paul Aller's G.I. Joe. that was a really good book, and I feel like I was the only one who read it. It was a terrific book, and I told him that every opportunity I got. And it's a bummer that they had to wrap it up. I think the market is really tough for slow burn stories right now. I think the market's really volatile right now in general. And I wish, in a just universe, Paul would have gotten 100 issues to tell his story. But I think he wound up having to wrap it in like 10 or 11. But in a parallel universe, he's still enjoying writing G.I. Joe, and I'm still enjoying reading it.
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's real cool. Well, let's see. I wanted to, so we're about at the end of our time. But just real quick, I wanted to have you just tell us just a quick capsule on the OZ, because we didn't get to touch on it earlier, but
Sure.
I wanted to make sure to ask you about it and just see if you could just share a quick tidbit about it, and then give everybody your the best place to keep up with you, which it seems like maybe your website, your main website.
Yeah. My website. You can also check out my Twitter, Pepose D. That's really like the best way to get in, to see what I'm up to. You can also follow David Pepose Comics on Facebook, or Pepose D on Instagram, or you can subscribe to my newsletter, Pep Talks, at bit.ly/pepnews.
Okay. And then tell us about the OZ.
Yeah, the OZ. It's What If the Hurt Locker took place in the Wizard of Oz. It's our sort of remix / unofficial sequel to the Wizard of Oz, starring the granddaughter of Dorothy Gale, who is also named Dorothy. She's an Iraq war veteran who's come home, and she's kind of grappling with disillusionment and PTSD. And she sort of one night, she's sort of at her lowest, and that's when the tornado strikes, and she finds herself stranded in the land of Oz. And we find out that her grandmother's adventures in Oz have sort of left some pretty horrible consequences. Basically, what happens when you get rid of like 2 wicked witches and the Wizard of Oz in like a week and then split. That's not like a happy ending. I figured that was Baghdad.
Yeah.
And so this is it's a war story set in the land of Oz. And I'm really proud of that book. It's probably the proudest thing I've ever made. It won a Ringo Award. So we're very proud of that. We are gearing up for a third Kickstarter that we're going to do sometime in 2023. Ruben Rojas is sort of chipping away at the artwork, but we're almost at a good enough critical mass that we can start kind of like rolling out a new Kickstarter for it. So, but it's one of those things, like, because like it, the way that like I'm blanking on the word. The way that supply chain issues are going in publishing in general. We want to give ourselves as much of a healthy lead time as possible. We want to have as much stuff in the can before we go in the Kickstarter. So TBD on when we're going to launch that. But I'm very excited. The thing has been written for quite some time. It's just sort of getting our ducks in a row in terms of the art, and then we're ready to roll.
Very cool. Well, you make sure, and if you have a list of people that, or I'll keep an eye out for it on, because I'd love to support it and shout it out and stuff once it's ready. And so you said on Instagram you are Pepose D also?
Yes.
Is that your current one? And then Twitter the same, Pepose D. Yep. And then it's davidpepose.com, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So where people can check it out. And hey, folks, you can purchase, I think, graphic novels through his website. And then you can also find them, Amazon and your local comic shop and everywhere else. Well, David, hey, it has been a pleasure. I want to honor your time because I know you got a lot of stuff going on. So we'll bring it in for a landing. But I just want to say a huge thank you for reaching out and for being a part and for hanging out with us.
Of course, my pleasure.
And this has been good. It's been good to just kind of hang out with you and check it out.
Well,
real quick, for those who are watching right now, just a couple of quick reminders. We will have, next week we'll have episodes, brand new episodes of Monday Halls Live, Mondays 10 p.m. Central. It's our weekly web series where we go through the past week to week and a half's worth of comic book pickups. Then on Wednesday night, we'll have the giveaway show. It's all about promoting generosity in the comic book community. We'll be talking about some of the latest news. I think a couple of the guys were telling me about our topics for this upcoming week. So I'm looking forward to that. That'll also be 10 p.m. Central on the on the channel on Wednesday night. And we'll be doing a giveaway book. I think we've got at least we've got a couple different books that we're going to be giving away. And then, as always, you can find some of my recommendations for top 10 books for different characters, including Booster Gold. This is to build up your collection with some cool books that are affordable and fun. And also The Punisher that just dropped about a month ago. And that one's been a pretty popular video as well. Also, just a quick note that if you want to get 10% off your ticket or your passes for Pop Culture Power Show coming up at the end of March, you can go to pwrshows.com and use the discount code Carlos Collects Comics, just like the name of the channel and the Instagram, and use that, get 10% off. Plus, you will also get a very special gift from me to you. And it's going to be a lot of fun. I know we'll have some different folks there. I think they're going to have Roy Thomas. They're going to have Larry Hama and several others. So that's a lot of fun. Looking forward to that one as well. So thank y'all so much for being here and hanging out with us. David and I are going to say goodbye for the day. We just want to thank you for being here with us, David, again. And for those watching on the rewind, thanks so much. Make sure and drop a comment. Tell us what you thought of today's hangout time and this creator interview. And we will see you next month. I'll be announcing the creator we've got for next month shortly. See you soon.
Have a good one.